left is militating against the advent of science, one of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? We live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
On adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach
That's what
children.
I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and there's the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So, I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. This is thought I had. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, 'cause I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point. Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
Based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like, why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. If to fight someone and say it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests. But the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of treatment.
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that...
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately, but... yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Why? Right? Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
Well, but the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So
I'll give it.
I agree. I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And I remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast study.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological. All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian?
And that scares me.
I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here.